Good afternoon, and welcome to the Marion Miner Cook Athenaeum. Today, we are excited to welcome David Orr as the keynote speaker for the inaugural Green Careers Conference. David is the Paul Sears Distinguished Professor of Environmental Studies and Politics and Senior Advisor to the President at Oberlin College, and Stephen A. Mentor Fellow at the Cleveland Foundation. He is one of the leading voices in the environmental movement, contributing to fields including ecological design, environmental education, and climate change. He is the author of 6 books, including his most recent work, Hope is an Imperative, The Essential David Orr. He is widely known for his work on greening college campuses. In 1996, he organized the effort to design the first college building powered entirely on solar energy, the Adam Joseph Lewis Center. The building was later named one of the 30 milestone buildings in the 20th century by the U.S. Department of Energy. From there, he called on colleges and universities to work toward carbon neutrality as early as 2000, and by 2007, hundreds of colleges and universities made that pledge. Despite pestering colleges for 2 decades to step up on sustainability issues, David is the recipient of 6 honorary degrees and has been a scholar in residence at many universities. He has received countless awards for his outstanding leadership in sustainability and environmental education. Most recently, David has been working on the Oberlin project, inspired by a vision of an all-encompassing sustainable community in the town of Oberlin. This revolutionary joint effort between the city of Oberlin, Oberlin College, and private and institutional partners aimed to improve resilience, prosperity, and sustainability in the Oberlin community. Undoubtedly due to David's work, Oberlin is one of the 52 communities advancing to the quarterfinals for the Georgetown University Energy Prize, alongside our own Claremont. We hope he is willing to set aside the competition today and educate and inspire us around sustainability and environmental action. David Orr's Athenaeum Lecture is sponsored by the Office of Advancement, the President's Changemaker Fund, the Roberts Environmental Center. Along with our generous sponsors, we would like to personally thank Ernie Eisminger and Susan Edwards for their assistance in making this wonderful keynote a reality. As I must remind you, photography, audio, and video recording of any kind is prohibited. Please join me in welcoming David Orr to the Athenaeum.
You all eat well here. And well, I'd like to thank you for the introduction. We're here to talk about careers, is that right? Environmental careers, or just have lunch? I want to start and say that we loaned you Ernie Eisinger last, 5 years ago or 6 years ago, and the terms of the loan are he comes back to Oberlin. And so we want him back. Ernie, it's really good to see you again, and thanks for being such a good friend in leadership and what you do. I'm going to talk for about 40 minutes, and maybe a wee bit less, and then open the floor to some conversation. And let me say, first of all, if you want to have an environmental career, don't do it. Get a calling. And the difference in this is one that I grew up in a Presbyterian family for years and years back. And the difference between a career and a calling is what motivates you personally. And if you're trying to outsmart the world and figure out what's the smart thing to do, don't try to do it. A calling is something that is very different. It's what you really feel. It's what you're passionate about. It's not you trying to think through all the job listings and all the things that open up and things you see in a Wall Street Journal, whatever, and oh, that'd be a good career. Don't do it that way. Find something that you're really interested in doing. And as they say, have a life. And you can see this in retrospect. I had a student once for 4 years. He came into my office as a first-year student, and he said, "Vinny, what do you want to be?" "Well, I want to be a doctor." And then he proceeded through 4 years of C-level science, including a C- in organic chemistry, which qualified him for medical schools, maybe in Port-au-Prince, Haiti, or someplace, but no medical school in the United States. I didn't understand what was going on with Vinny until his parents showed up. And his parents came into my office. They were both doctors from New York City. And both were dressed to the nines, and they sat there. They were very upset with me because we'd been through Vinnies, 3.5 years of Vinnies' career, and he had not done well. And he kept saying, yes, I do want to be a doctor and so forth. And they finally left, and I said, Vinny, let's go up and have a cup of coffee. So we walked up the street to a coffee shop, and I said, Vinny, what do you want to be? A doctor. And I said, no, you don't. Tell me, what do you want to be? He said, you really want to know? I said, yeah, I really do want to know. He said, I've been wild about wolves ever since I read Little Red Riding Hood, or whatever it was. And he'd been subscribing to the Journal of Wolfology or whatever it was, and he was nutty about wolves. And I happen to have a friend that was doing a wolf education project in Montana. I'm not sure whether he was educating ranchers about wolves or wolves about ranchers, but he was in Montana. So I called him and said, you have room for one more research assistant. So Vinny went up there that summer, and the rest of the story is he got a PhD in wildlife behavior and wildlife management. And the point of the story is that Vinny was trying to do what he thought his parents wanted him to do. They didn't have the good judgment to back off Vinny. It's his life. Let him find his own level. So find a calling, which means you may want to go sit on top of a mountain. We don't have mountains in Ohio, but you've got them here. Go find a good mountain to sit on and think about it. What makes you tick? What's really important to you? And it's not for others to say what is important to you. We can offer some advice, here and there, but I don't know, imagine, you make up the story yourself, but imagine Moses going in to talk to his guidance counselor and walks in and says, Moses, have a seat. Can I call you Mo? And Moses, I read your file here, and I really admire the part about you wanting to lead your people to the promised land. That's great. I admire your dedication. The part about crossing the Red Sea is a little weak. You may want to rethink that. But Moses, the Pharaoh, has started a building program here in Egypt, and he's going to build these triangular structures for, and you've got real aptitude in engineering and architecture and building. You'd be a great builder. And then fill in the blanks. Martin Luther King, Nelson Mandela, Mother Teresa, fill in the blanks. There was no way you could have counseled that person in a way that was effective. So any advice you get from career planners is going to be probably misleading. Get a life. Stay open to possibilities. Decide what's important to you. Now, we're here to talk about environment, and why should environment be on your career list? And what would that be if you were to choose that? Martin Rees, the Astronomer Royal in Britain, gave us, in a book called, the American edition was called Our Final Hour. And in Our Final Hour, he gave us 50-50 odds, we meaning civilization, to make it to the year 2100. Now, maybe he was off by half, or maybe he was too optimistic, as many of his scientific friends thought. But the fact of the matter is the big numbers are running against us. That's just hard science. It's not politics, that's not left, that's not right. The big numbers are running against us. Let me offer 4 of these. One is simply population growth. I've lived I'm almost up to the 3rd doubling in my life. And you will live in a world, now presently 7.2 billion people, you'll live in a world, if you have a normal lifespan of 9 or maybe 10 or possibly even 11 billion people, the earth is going to be really crowded. And that changes a lot of things. There's more people pursuing more stuff and having higher expectations and so forth. Carbon levels in the atmosphere, CO2 levels in the atmosphere are now consistently at 400 parts per million around the world. And there's nobody in the room here that can give us good reason why why we would stop short of 450 or so forth. The inertial momentum of the fossil fuel economy is going to carry us to probably 450 and possibly a good bit beyond. And then begin to think through what that means. That doesn't mean just global warming. That's planetary destabilization. Everything that we think we know about how the world works physically and also how humans live in that world is going to change dramatically. And so at 400 parts per million, with a roughly 30-year lag, the anomalies that we're now seeing are the result not of 400 parts per million, but something rather more like 365 or 370 parts per million. The oceans are the big thermal anchor on the planet. So we don't know yet what 400 parts per million is going to do, but we know it, we're not going to like it. And 450, we're going to like a whole lot less. Here's a third number. By most estimates, in your lifetime, we'll lose 25 to 50% of the species on the Earth. We'll be gone. So we're coming through what Elizabeth Colbert in the book calls the sixth extinction spasm, or you can call it a biological holocaust by whatever name. The Earth in your life and in mine is becoming much more threadbare. There's no end in that, no end in sight to that process. Oxfam released a report, this is the fourth number, released a report 2 weeks ago that showed bad things about income distribution. And in that report, there's a number that just leaps off the page. 80 people have more net wealth than the bottom 3.5 billion people on the planet. 80 people. You could easily seat them in half of this room. 80 people have more net wealth than the bottom 3.5 or 3.6 billion people. That's a world that is designed for trouble. People are not going to accept that. So you got four numbers. Everything that you do, and it doesn't matter what your career is, whether it's law or business or agriculture or forestry or politics, whatever your career is, those four numbers are the backdrop. You'll play your life out, so to speak, on a topography that has those features on it. And that will change everything about the world that you may have come to expect. That's a world that is designed for trouble. So why do environment? Well, very simply, whatever your career line is, environment will be the issue in one way or another that you have to contend with. Whether it's crowded freeways, or it's changing climate, or it's food issues, or it's legal issues, you have to contend with it. And so whatever your chosen career line is, across the whole range of futures you could have, you'll face environmental issues in one form or another, and probably you'll face a good many of the subsidiary or collateral consequences of environmental issues, which will include more conflict, probably political instability, more economic instability, and so forth. That's just the future we created. Martin Luther King, in what is one of the great state papers, I think, in American political life, said, describing the fierce urgency of now, he said, in this unfolding conundrum of life and history, there is such a thing as being too late. Procrastination is still the thief of time. Life often leaves us standing bare and naked and dejected with a lost opportunity. The tide in the affairs of men doesn't remain at the flood. It ebbs. And we may cry out desperately for time to pause in her passage, but time is deaf to every plea and rushes on. Over the bleached bones and jumbled residue of numerous civilizations are written the pathetic words, too late. What the environment represents for us is a challenge, and it is possible to be too late. And the civilization, in years in the past, I'd worked for Jimmy Carter's transition team in 1976. In that administration, Carter had wanted a paper on the most important environmental issues administration would face, and so we drafted a document which still reads well. That was 1976. And we've been passing, like going down a freeway, we've been passing off-ramps to safer destinations than what's in sight. The fierce urgency of now. So whatever your line of work, whatever you choose to do, you've got to do it now with a sense of urgency that we're quite unaccustomed to in this society. This is the only planet that we've got, and we are undergoing a phase change from what geologists call the Holocene to what is now being called, following Paul Crutzen's word, the Anthropocene. And that change is one that we're not necessarily going to like a lot. So what's to be done? Let me get back down to careers. Well, Thomas Berry, the great philosopher who died 5 or 6 years ago, toward the end of his life wrote a book called The Great Work. And the argument in The Great Work is simply that generations have sometimes monumental things to do. The generation that fought World War II had to defeat the Depression, Nazism, and then had to reckon with communism at the end of that process. Their great work was to go to battlefields in Europe and in the far Pacific and make sacrifices that there's no way that we can appreciate what they did for us, adequately appreciate what they did for us. And the same is true in the Civil War. But you think of the great battles of human civilization. Nobody wanted to do those things. Nobody wanted to go fight and die at Antietam or the Battle of the Bulge or in islands in the Pacific. But they did it, and they did their work well. Our great work is rather different. And it starts with trying to understand and imagine possibilities. And one of the great things about a college education at a wonderful place like this, and the 7 colleges here, is imagination is your stock and trade. How do you imagine possibilities? Because we won't do much better than our capacity to see things that could be but are not. And so then how do we create things? It's one thing to imagine, but it's a very different thing and very different kind of art form to take an idea and then make something of it. And then for your generation, you got to learn how to restore and how to heal. And I think also provide solace and counseling, because we're coming into an era in which there's going to be a good bit of grieving. We came through the 20th century when roughly 200 million people died in various battle deaths and concentration camps and gulags and killing fields and so forth. That exerted a traumatic influence, I think, on our collective psyche in ways that we don't fully appreciate. Now we're coming into an era in which we're changing the nature of the planet. The world we've lived on throughout all of our career as a species is changing dramatically, and it's changing so fast. It's right before our very eyes. I think there's going to be some psychological pain that goes with it. I know there's going to be psychological pain that goes with this. Let me get to specifics. In your great work, you have one huge challenge that takes precedent over all others. If the Earth was a patient and you brought the Earth into some cosmic emergency ward, what would you do? And the first thing you would do would be to rebalance the vital signs of the planet. And the most important of those right now is to eliminate carbon-based fuels and do it with a sense of wartime urgency that were quite unexpected. This isn't just a market thing. This has to be driven by political decisions with market as part of the context. But you've got to put your shoulder to that wheel. We've got to get rid of fossil fuels, and we don't have much time to do it. And that gets complicated. And there are whole new careers in that. If you think of what you do, if you're an engineer, that's an engineering challenge. If you're an economist, that's a business challenge. If you're a business person, that is an investment challenge. If you're a city councilman or somebody involved in the conduct of the public business, that is a huge challenge to simply the way we do our public business. And then it's also a challenge to our good judgment. Bill McKibben, in an article in Rolling Stone, maybe 2.5 years ago now, called The Terrifying New Math About Climate Change, pointed out something that was really important. We're going to have to leave a good bit of the fossil fuels that are called reserves in the ground. And we've plowed through about half of what we've already burned. We can maybe burn roughly safely, but we don't even know where that safe line is. The rest has to be consigned to be taken off the books. Now you think about how you do this. There are 3 ways to do it. One is, and the point, let me add to this, that the point is that if we burn all of those reserves, as ExxonMobil and other owners of fossil fuel reserves fully intend to do, we go well past a 2 degrees centigrade warming of the planet. We're already about 0.9 degrees centigrade. We've got in the pipeline roughly another 0.8 or 0.9 that we're already committed to. But if we try to stop it at as much as we can at 2 degrees centigrade, not Fahrenheit, 2 degrees centigrade warming, we've got to commit ourselves not to burn a lot of the fossil fuels that are in the ground. So they have to come off the books. And so a lot of people that have fossil fuel laden endowments and wealth and portfolios are going to find those endowments are going to be deflated by that amount. But there are 3 ways to do this, and this is a huge public policy issue. One is you can simply confiscate those energy reserves. Secondly, you can compensate. We can simply buy them out, and rather the form that the British bought slaves in the Caribbean and did not fight a civil war, they simply paid the slave owners for the slaves. They didn't compensate the slaves for being slaves, but they did compensate the slave owners. Or thirdly, we could simply render them irrelevant. And this is the efficiency and solar revolution. So we just don't need to burn them. The choice will probably be, in the end, some combination of those three things. But that is a huge public policy issue, and that will take leaders with genuine courage to do that. Takes me to a second specific. We need a new economy. We know what capitalism has done, and this is not an argument for or against capitalism or for anything else. But we'll need to recalibrate the economy that we have presently that has been so destructive on the planet with the way the world works as a physical system. And there are people who argue that capitalism can rise to that challenge and do it. There are people who say, no, it can't. Naomi Klein, in her new book, This Changes Everything, argues that capitalism cannot do it. Good arguments can be made on both sides, but there's no more urgent economic issue than deciding what kind of economy we can live with indefinitely that is fair and decent and durable. And that will take a lot of brain power. That's going to take a lot of, if your field happens to be economics and finance, this is a real challenge. How do you rethink everything you've ever heard about economics and neoclassical economics and so forth relative to this environmental challenge? We now know a good bit more than Adam Smith knew when he wrote The Wealth of Nations in 1776. We know consequences that he had no way of knowing. And so how do we rethink, and this again has to be done with this fierce urgency or fierce sense of urgency. There's a third issue, very specifically. If your field happens to be international relations, we need to rethink the way the world system works relative to all these challenges. The Cold War ended a long time ago. Now we're creeping back, apparently, back toward it. But there's still something like 10,000 nuclear weapons on the planet. The systems that control those nuclear weapons are jury-rigged, probably unsafe. We saw several years ago that some of the people in charge of our nuclear weapons were on drugs, were faking tests, were coming to work drunk. That system could still blow up. It's kind of gone off our psychological radar screen. But if your concern is about peace and fairness and international relations, that is a huge challenge. How do we denuclearize this world? And many of the people who argued for nuclear weapons in years gone by, including Henry Kissinger, have now come back to 180 degrees and say that was a wrong decision. We now need to denuclearize the world. Here's a fourth challenge. If your interest is in law, there is a real challenge to begin to rethink the legal regime that we live with and live under with the way the world works as a physical system. In the preamble to the Constitution, the word posterity appears. It never appears again in our Constitution. There's very little case law, relevant case law, about how the rights of future generations play into this. Not far from here, years ago, a lawyer, a legal scholar, Christopher Stone, wrote a book called Should Trees Have Standing? That book is still a classic. By what boundaries do we draw around the legal system? And right now, my great-grandchildren have no protection, none whatsoever. Their rights are not counted legally. They have no standing before courts. So Christopher Stone was raising the issue, should trees have standing, natural objects? There's still no good answer to that. Should future generations have legal standing? Should we begin to readjust our behavior relative to their rights? And if so, how do we do that? And how are those rights adjudicated? They have presently no representative, no advocate in the court where decisions are being made that are compromising and in many ways undermining their future. To continue that list, we need new cities. If your interest is in urban planning and cities generally, there's a very vibrant movement now to rebuild and rethink urban lives. We're now in this country a little over 50% urban. The world is moving toward a figure that'll be 60, maybe 70% urban in your lifetime. And most of the cities have been built, they're built with very different populations in mind. They're very different structures. They were built around cars and automobiles and so forth. Now we need to rethink how we live in cities. And while we're at it, those cities need to be powered by sunshine, and they need to begin to trend towards zero waste. There is a huge challenge here. How do you make zero waste facilities? So instead of cradle to grave, it's more like Wood McDonough's description of it's cradle to cradle. So every waste product becomes an input someplace else in the process. If you want to be outdoors and your interest is in agriculture or forestry or land management, here is a huge field that requires smart, adaptable, well-educated, and scientifically grounded people. Can we farm natural systems? Could we feed 7 billion people with organic agriculture properly done? I think we probably could. 9 billion people, maybe a stretch. But there is a field here and work to be done in rethinking the way we feed ourselves and provision ourselves with food and fiber both. My background is as a political scientist, and issues of governance are foremost in this, in politics. How do we get beyond the standoff between left and right in this country, and to some degree around the world? How do we get past this sterile conservative versus liberal thinking? It isn't liberal versus conservative. It is present versus future. The conflict line runs our behavior, whether you're left or right, is in direct conflict with your needs as you grow older, and the rights and the sustainability and the equity for your children off into the future. How do we get beyond that? How do we get money out of the political process? How do we undo Citizens United, one of the most pernicious civil decisions made by the Supreme Court ever? I mean, you have to go back to maybe the Dred Scott decision to find something as bad. Getting more obscure. If your interests are in theology, we need a whole new theology, whatever the origins of it. It may be a blending of all kinds of religions, but we need a new theology, one that ties us to the earth and protects the earth. And a friend of mine years ago did I think a 9 or 10 volume study that looked at all the religions of the world and extracted from those the parts that were earth-centered. It turned out that virtually every religious tradition has an ecological component. How do we blend this into a set of beliefs we can live with indefinitely? There's a, related to this, what is the human role on Earth? There's an old tale that goes back into about the year 900 or so, called the Tale of the Jinn. And the Tale of the Jinn it's a trial. Humankind, we're on trial. And in the jury box are all the animals. And the animals have been given voice and sentience. They can speak. And so the eagles and the snakes and the bears and so forth are all in the jury box. And we're on trial. And the question before them is, should we be allowed to continue to live on Earth? And I used to give this to my students, and Oberlin students are very different than you all, I'm sure. They would hear the story, and they would decide if they were the attorney for the human race, they would simply give up. There's no good case that would be made for us. And they have a strong dose of Presbyterian angst, I think. But then you think about it. What case can be made for us? And then you begin to think Mozart, music, art, science, poetry, and the sides of human life that are worth saving. And a very different story begins to come out. But the point of this is this. If we better knew why we deserve to be sustained beyond the fact that we want to be, I think we would better know how to go about the process of sustaining ourselves. And that requires some thinking. That's probably best done in the arts and cinematography. But what case could be made for us? And I think our morale as a species has suffered a good bit in thinking of ourselves as simply animals or as simply economic self-maximizers. We are more than that. But it takes some thinking to get at that. So there is a career, not just in theology, but in art, in poetry, and in music. What case could be made for us? And I think a very powerful case could be made that we deserve, at our best, to be sustained. And then for all of you who are into philosophy and cosmology, there's a paradigm shift from a world that was created, and all of us are Cartesians, whether we like it or not. We've been imprinted with certain ideas that we take to be simply the way the world is. And so we're all Cartesians. We're all shaped by Galileo and Bacon and Descartes and these people that imprinted the modern world so powerfully. We have to make a transition in how we think. And let's just, for lack of a better word, let's just call it systems thinking. We live in a world where things are related. You and I are related. We're related to life in more ways than we can possibly begin to describe. We're related to the past and to the future. We're embedded in this long evolutionary process. Our genetic makeup doesn't differ appreciably from bonobos and chimpanzees. We don't differ much at the genetic level, In some ways, not even at the behavioral level. We're akin to all that ever was and all that ever will be in ways we can't describe. And we ourselves bodily are kind of a rowdy congress of other organisms. Most of us, if you just by weight, I am told on good authority, by weight, most of what is in each of us is a different kind of organism. So we've been occupied, we have been seized, we have been controlled in lots of ways by other organisms that are simply part of our makeup. Even our own bodies are part of this process. So how do we begin to change a paradigm that said you can divide the world up into disciplines and compartments, rather like a mailbox pigeonhole system? And so there's political science, there's chemistry, there's sociology, anthropology, and so forth, all of these disciplines. Our mindsets are shaped by that siloization process. How do we begin to see the world whole again? And that ties back to the issue of religion and begin to rethink our role in the world. Whole is connected etymologically to holiness, health, healing. And there's an etymology here that begins to, how do we begin to think like this? Then how do we stretch our thinking out over the long term? Because one of the issues we're going to face, and this is a tough one, one of the issues we face is that once carbon is in the atmosphere, for example, it stays there a long time. Something like 20 or 25% of the carbon I'll emit tomorrow morning flying back to Ohio, where it's snowy and cold, will stay in the atmosphere for maybe 10,000 years. How do we begin to think like that? The consequences of our actions, and how to begin to see that further horizon. And then if we can see that, how do we keep our sense of hope, and not optimism here, but hope alive? So we're caught in a bit of a trap, aren't we? As you think about your lives and careers, we're caught in a bit of a trap. On one side, if you're optimistic, you don't know enough. You're not reading science and nature and geophysical letters. You're not paying attention to the hard numbers, this remorseless working of big numbers that describe our ecological niche and our prospects in that niche. On the other hand, if you are look at all this stuff and just throw up your hands and go into despair, that's a sin. You don't want to go there. The middle ground is called hope. And I've said in some of my writings that hope is a verb with its sleeves rolled up. So if you're optimistic or you're in despair, you don't have to do a thing. You can sit back and you can go with the tide, you can go with the flow, and whatever you want to do, make a lot of money, do whatever you want to do, and enjoy life on your own. But if you're hopeful, you have to do something. You've got to roll up your sleeves. You've got to work to improve something, to help something, to heal something, to restore something, whether it's big or little, doesn't much matter. But the only hopeful people I know, the only genuinely hopeful people I know, are people actually engaged in the work of building a better world than what's in prospect. So if you're optimistic, again, you just don't know enough. You're not paying enough attention. If you're in despair, that's wrong. You don't want to go there. But find that middle ground and call it hope. And then finally, let me say just a word about you, and then let's open up for questions. Every one of you in the ages between 18 and 22 or so, you can't know how big you can be, but you can do more than you know now. Second, it's going to help you a whole lot when you think about whatever your career is, whatever you end up doing. And I have no advice about careers, actually. If you can laugh at yourself, it is the one thing that'll keep you sane in a world that is all too often insane. And I mean laugh at yourself, not laugh at others. It's going to help if you've got a reverse gear, if you're a little bit less certain of your certainties. And it's going to help you, when you fail, to learn how to get back up and get into the fight again. Just being a little too dumb to know that you've been beaten, and you stay in the fight. You've got to have some stamina. Let me end with a poem, and one I like a lot. It's called Winter Wheat. It's by Libby Roderick. When I was young, I thought that failure was impossible. All wrongs would be righted in my time. Now I am old, I see that failure is impossible. I pass the torch to you. Will you hold it high? For we're sowing winter wheat that other hands will harvest, that they might have enough to eat after we're gone. We'll plant shade trees that we will not sit under. We will light candles that others can see their way. We'll struggle for justice, though we'll never see it flower. Our children's children will live in peace one day. When I was young, I thought there were no human enemies. People must be taught to hate and fear. Now I am old. I know that there are no human enemies, but only souls in pain, and we can reach them if we dare. So we're sowing winter wheat that other hands will harvest, that they might have enough to eat after we are gone. Each generation passes like the leaves of an old oak tree whose roots are strong. Each new generation bursts out like the spring, and they will be the ones to carry on. When I was young, I dreamed the earth was healed and whole again, creatures, trees, and rivers free and wild. Now I'm old. I dream the planet healed and whole again. That dream's reborn forever in the heart of each new child. So we're sowing winter wheat that other hands will harvest, that they might have enough to eat after we are gone. We'll plant shade trees that we will not sit under. We'll light candles that others can see their way. We'll struggle for justice, though we'll never see it flower. Our children's children will live in peace one day. We'll plant shade trees that we will not sit under. We will light candles that others can see their way. We'll struggle for justice, though we'll never see it flower. Our children's children will live in peace one day. Our children's children will live in peace one day. Thank you all very much.
We now have time for questions. As always, preference goes to students.
The questions are to be easy, with yes or no answers.
Thank you so much for coming to talk today. I was wondering, I was directed by Bill Asher, actually, my thesis reader, to identify sort of something when finding my topic that drove me and I wasn't just interested in, but that I really wanted to find a solution to. And I was wondering for you personally, if you wouldn't mind sharing what specifically drives you in your work today.
This gets me to do a PowerPoint presentation of my grandchildren. That's a good question. It's fair enough. For one thing, I did a PhD in political science, and I taught for 9 or 10 years. Went out and, in a fit of madness, bought 1,500 acres out in north central Arkansas and began to think about what does wholeness mean. And so I started this with a passion for environment, but also a curiosity about what do we do? What do we actually do about it? So in the 1,500 acres we had up in north central Arkansas, we had the idea was draw a line around that. It's very John Dewey-esque. Draw a line around it. Everything that happened in there, the way we farmed, the way we handled our forestry, the way we built, was all part of the curriculum. And not a new idea. That was John Dewey. And so that was for 11 years. And I think the one answer here is it's a passion for wholeness. I find that intellectually really interesting and also I think very important. When I went to Oberlin 25 years ago, the Adam Joseph Lewis Center, which was a project we did with about 250 students, the goal was to see if we could build a building powered entirely by sunshine that had released no waste product. It was basically a U.S. Green Building Council platinum building before there was a rating system. That building last year generated 136% of its power from sunshine. We sell the surplus back to the utility. Now you got to remember, you've got sunshine here in Ohio. Sunshine is still a theory, largely regarded as unproven. But the idea, can you take this idea of wholeness and apply it to a small building? I find that really intellectually interesting and also portentous and important. Current work is to take that model and raise it up to the city of Oberlin, roughly a city of give or take 10,000. And can you build a city powered by sunshine, prosperous economy, and begin to make it a model of sustainability? So from the hills of Arkansas, 1,500 acres, to a very complicated renewable powered building to a small city. And now we're working to take the model up to the regional scale. If you imagine Lake Erie here, and up here there's Flint, Michigan, where the tax base drops 20% per year. That's a city in free fall. Detroit, you've all heard about, and Toledo, Oberlin, Cleveland, and Youngstown. So that was at Lake Erie Crescent. So now we're seeing if we can take that model and apply that to a regional scale and harnessing the buying and investing power of big sports teams, big hospital complexes, and big universities, and begin to shift about $1 billion per year from one ledger book to another one. Now, to answer your question directly, I find this stuff really, really interesting. So I've sought out challenges that I found just intellectually interesting. I would like to believe that what we're trying to do is really important too. It's a small drop in a very big ocean of possible solutions, but I find it really interesting. And I could pull out comments also. I do have 4 grandchildren. I really don't want to leave a world wrecked behind for them. And so the 40-some years in the environmental movement, or whatever you want to call this, I don't really think of it as an environmental movement, but it's a move toward wholeness and toward healing and so forth. And then the last thing is, I really enjoy this. I have more fun, and you're taking on challenges. The best people I know are somewhere in the environmental movement. There are people like Wendell Berry and Wes Jackson and Amory Lovins and Bill McKibben. I mean, there are people who have given their lives to solving real issues and real problems. And they're some of the best people in the world. As I get around the world a good bit, what used to be, if I had said here 25 years ago that there would be a global movement, global environmental movement, again, I don't like the word environment, it's a bigger movement than that, I would have been blowing smoke. But you can't go anywhere in the world now without finding people, like-minded people. And they're Republican and Democrat, liberal, conservative, but there's a passion to restart, humankind 2.0. Reboot this system, empower it by sunshine, make it fair, make it decent, make it beautiful, make it fun, make it a celebration. And so it's that drives me. That's a long answer to a really good question, but thanks for that.
Hi, thank you for the talk. I love the point you mentioned that if we personify the environment for the future and give them rights, give it rights, and how do we alter our practices today to make sure that the rights are protected? Could you elaborate on, other than economics and public policy, what best practices can we employ today in science, religion, consumerism, all other landscapes, and what would that look like 2 or 3 generations down?
I heard some of that. Let me answer what I think I heard. You and I are visual creatures. We tend to believe what we see, touch, feel, experience. The reverse probably also in some way is true. We tend to see what we believe. But sight exerts a very powerful influence on us. And so for what I've been doing over the last 25 years at Oberlin or before is to try to give visual manifestation to things that needed to be done. And so the idea of, I mentioned our place in Arkansas, 1,500 acres. Can you render a place like that a curriculum around natural resource management, agriculture, forestry, energy systems, building, and economy, and so forth? And that it changes everything. I mean, Naomi Klein's title of her book, it really does change everything once you have that perspective. So if you want to go into the sciences, for example, I don't think we need many more people in the sciences figuring out how we can make more widgets and sell to each other. But we desperately need sciences harnessed to healing, to restoration, to the solar economy. We need sciences about healing the human body. I don't think we actually need a whole lot more stuff on robotics. That's my personal peak. I think we need sciences, in this case, the science of economics, that says, wait, you keep people at work. Right now, the number of people on the planet that are structurally unemployed, for which we have nothing good for them to do, is growing by leaps and bounds, and it will continue to grow. And so we need people who think about how science ought to be applied. If the essence of science is skepticism, then the only scientific attitude towards science itself is to be skeptical of it. Not to dismiss it, not to blow it off, we got too much of that, but begin to think about how do we harness this very powerful engine of science to a list of real human needs. Not what corporations want, not necessarily what governments want, but what we actually need, and how do we make that knowledge available? So I think it is important, whatever the field is, to make it visible and to begin to rethink and recalibrate the way our brain power works relative to our long-term prospects. I don't know if that answered the question, because I didn't pick up all you. Did that more or less get it, or? more or less? All right.
You mentioned Citizens United as one of the worst Supreme Court decisions ever, and I was wondering what hope do you see in overturning that, and especially considering like how influential it is in sort of maintaining itself?
Let's go to the next question. Is there another one? Woo! Overturned Supreme. Well, this gets into a longer conversation. I don't think there is much immediate hope. It has to be overturned by a majority in Congress or by the amendment process, whatever, but it's going to take a while, and American politics aren't ready for that. If I back up one step, Lord Stearns wrote probably the most famous economic treatise on climate change, published in 2007 or so. And he said that climate change was the largest market failure in history. And as a political scientist, I would say that climate change is evidence of the largest political failure in history long before it was an economic failure. And politics and economics are flip sides of the same coin. It used to be called political economy. What the Supreme Court did, and this, I don't want to get into offend anybody's politics, and this is not intended to be right or left, but if you're very conservative, I think Citizens United would really upset you. It said that money is primary in the political process. And so when the Koch brothers said 2 weeks ago that they were willing to put in upwards of $900 million in the next campaign cycle for the 2016 election, they think they can buy an election. And the Supreme Court says that's okay. You can buy it. And so it isn't one person, one vote anymore. That's the original intent of the Constitution. I think we have to re-engage as citizens in the process. And I think that we have been, by and large, bad citizens. And I think it's harder now to be a citizen. The issues are more complicated. What does an alert citizen think about, let's say, genetic engineering, let alone Citizens United? It's a tough issue. And how do you deal with nanotechnologies? And how do we think about these things? And what's that have to do with my citizenship? And I think that we have to be, we need to resurrect the idea of engaged citizens. And of course, the core of that belief from Thomas Jefferson on was a free press that in fact was free, and you had an informed public, by and large, with a marketplace of ideas and different ways to think about things. But that's what we have lost. You know, if you go back in history, the Lincoln-Douglas debates in 1858, Lincoln and Stephen A. Douglas were squared off for a Senate seat in Illinois. And if you read the textbook or the text transcripts of those debates, what you realize very soon was, in the total version, people would laugh and they would applaud, they would jeer, but they were listening. I think they weren't in an air-conditioned room sitting at a comfortable table having had a lot to eat. They were probably out in a hot field, and they were standing, and there were no microphones. There was no way to be heard other than just the power of the voice. Yet they heard, and they listened carefully enough. And they responded viscerally to things that were going on and things being said. And some of those people later believed in those ideas enough that they fought for them and they died for them. That was their great work. And they did it. Those were citizens. Those were citizens. We are consumers. And we've redefined ourselves as consumers and as economic creatures with certain rights to purchase and buy and so forth. And so the economy takes a little blip up and down, and that drives elections. When did that happen? Why don't we drive elections based on the power of the issues and the ideas? That's what citizens do. And now we have to understand that we're citizens of a bigger enterprise. It's called planet Earth. And a longer lived enterprise. It's called evolution. And it's called how, it's the whole human. So back on your question, I don't think there's an immediate answer to this, but if anybody in the room has an inkling to do public service, do it. We need people. That is a noble profession. It's been demeaned for so long. And it started, let me be political in this way. It didn't start with Ronald Reagan, but when Ronald Reagan in 1980 made his point, Morning in America, that was 1984, but he made his point that government was the problem, not the answer. And then we've had echoes about that. How did government become the problem? I mean, it can be, but any organization can become a problem. Claremont McKenna can be a problem. The WCTU can be a problem. Labor unions can be a problem. Supreme Court can be a problem. I mean, once we organize human affairs, they can become problems. And the way you avoid that is to keep things transparent and require certain reporting and have elections and so forth. We have mechanisms by which we keep things on even keel. Am I making sense? We have to rethink the way we conduct the public business, and money has got to be no part of it. We've got to make decisions based on much more rigorous and robust and more transparent and more equal criteria. And I think if you have an inkling to run for office, do it. Get in public service. Engage the process. Is it messy? You bet it's messy. But in this movement, I'm going to be just critical for one moment of my environmental movement friends, and many of them are very good friends. We walked away from politics, the politics of environment. We thought that if we just publish another book, have another high-powered conference in some exotic place, one more article in Science magazine, that the public will realize this. We thought that facts and data and logic would be enough. They're never enough, never enough. You saw the movie Selma? Facts, how many have seen the movie Selma? Facts, data, and logic don't matter a whole lot sometimes. It comes down at some points to raw political power, and we've got to be political. We in the environmental movement walked away from the politics, much to our shame, I think, in the 60s and 70s, or let me put late 70s. We walked away. We thought if we just do our research and writing and so forth, it would all change. It didn't. And then we find out we got to fight for it. And so public service, I think, is really important. I would put that on your career list to consider. If you are dedicated to the public and public issues, this is where the battles will be fought. Not all of them. Marketplace will be a lot of battles, but this is where we'll win or lose the issues. It will be in political arenas. Are they messy? Yeah. Will there be a lot of compromise? Sure. But there ought to be a fierce urgency of now to recast the public business. And it ought to start in places like this. I mean, you learn in student governance here some of the rules of how to do this. Anyway, long-winded answer. Thanks for the question. I don't see anything immediate unless somebody else, maybe Jerry Brown can run for presidency or something. I don't know. But anyway, thanks for that.
Hello. I think from everything we've heard today, it's pretty clear that education will play a huge role in working on how, in getting us to rethink our outlook and getting us to look at the future in a more urgent way. Do you see any clear or any obvious changes that need to be made to K-12 education or college education? Anything in terms of how we change our mindsets?
Russell? Yeah, thanks for that. Yes, next question. Look, the issue is the environment's not the problem, never has been. We're the problem. And so education needs to put us back in the role of being part of the environment. And any education that doesn't teach us that we're part of, not a part from, the environment is wrong. But it's all environmental education one way or another. When it teaches you're a part from it, that's environmental education, it's just wrong. But yeah, I would do it differently. My wife was a third grade teacher. And so I got a chance to see some of her handiwork, and kids come into school, at least they used to, avid to find out what's this and how's that related to that and so forth. And so there's a natural curiosity built into us. If I was making recommendations about education, I would say to every parent, take a large heavy object in your den or TV room and throw it at high velocity through the TV screen. Confiscate all the iPads and all those little screens that kids watch. We're told up to 9 hours a day is the average. Confiscate them, lock them away, or drop them in the well. Don't let them see that again. Let them experience the world. as it is, not as it's artificially created on a screen or by artists or whatever. Now, this runs so far against the grain because all of you do this. I mean, some of you are tweeting right now and Twittering or whatever, but we're so tied in. And so I do worry that we become, as Albert Einstein once said, a nation of idiots because we've been beguiled by little things with screens and whether it's television or smartphones or whatever. I do worry about that. I would change education to include a lot more experiential stuff early on. And the goal here, as Alfred North Whitehead, the great mathematician, once put it, is to cause a love affair between a young person and the world as it is. A lot more time spent outdoors and playing, not in front of a TV set, but outdoors. And so this means for those of you who want to get into urban planning and city planning, a lot more parks, safe spaces, make it clean and green and accessible. And we have this idea that wildness is somewhere in Montana, and cities like Los Angeles or Cleveland, Ohio, they're cities. No, let's make cities where wildness intersperses with the built environment. Let's begin to make it more let's make interesting places to live. And we're biological creatures. We have this biophilic sense, as E.O. Wilson put it. Let's make biophilic cities. And there's a lot of good work being done on that. I mean, that's a really exciting field. Instead of thinking that education happens only in classrooms, let's see cities themselves as educational vendors. So I've got a bunch of students now working on public dashboards. So there are places where you can see data on all sorts of things, carbon emissions and whatnot. I've asked the owner of the Cleveland Indians to give me the big scoreboard out in center field, and the scoreboard would be fully the length of this room and half again the width or the height of it. Give me that scoreboard for 20 seconds every 9 innings. And I want to have a class to see what my students would want to report to baseball fans as they sit and watch a baseball game. What do you want people to see? Give me 20 seconds. So I begin to rethink education the way it plays out in public settings. And then, I don't know what you do in higher education, but let me offer 2 suggestions. One is we need a lot more work at the boundaries. And unfortunately, I think the incentive structure in higher education is still centripetal. It draws you into a smaller field. I'm all for specialization, but we need synthesis and systems thinking also. So intellectually, we need to walk on 2 legs. One is about specialization and learning lots about a field. The other is knowing how to combine fields like economics and ecology and physics and ethics together. How do you have an intelligent conversation across fields, not just fields that are autistic to each other? The second suggestion is, I think that in the Oberlin project and the Lake Erie Crescent project, I think we need to see colleges and universities as anchor institutions. They've got buying and investing power. They have the incredible talents of great faculty and the energies of very smart students and all of you. And I think we need to see this as the start of a anchor institution. So what we're doing in the Lake Erie Crescent project and what we've done in the Oberlin project is to begin to use the assets and resources of a college to drive the community and the region in a very different direction, to begin to lead it into sustainability. And again, there's nothing new about that idea. Judith Rodin, who's president of the Rockefeller Foundation, years ago when she was the president of the University of Pennsylvania, took $600 million out of their endowment, if I remember the story correctly, to leverage $2.2 billion in investment. And the Penn campus, when I went to Penn, it was, you didn't walk down Walnut Street at 12 noon without an armed guard. That was 1 million years ago. Now that 40 block area, now it's almost 60 blocks around Penn is really a nice university. It's a great urban university now. And the one thing I would do differently would have been to engage students in the process of remaking that area. But to begin to harness the buying and investing power and the brain power of colleges and universities, not just as inward-looking enterprises, but also now as anchor institutions leading their communities in very different directions. And that's a very exciting curriculum. Our goal with the Oberlin project was 1,000 students working to remake the city of Oberlin in 10 years. We're way ahead of schedule. Our goal in the Lake Erie Crescent project is 100,000 students working around that Lake Erie, from Flint, Michigan, University of Michigan, Michigan State, University of Toledo, all the way over to Youngstown State University, but remaking the region. And you think about the curriculum in that. I mean, it's incredible. Urban renewal, economics, finance. Our driver here is mostly finance and investment. but begin to rethink everything from urban design to the way cities are taxed and finances. I mean, there's a whole other curriculum in that, but it's anchor institutions. And for all of you faculty in the room, administrators, we've got to reinvent higher education. I mean, big time. We used to have a monopoly on learning. It was locked up in the library. Now it's out. It's on internet, or we think it's on internet. And if I'm a young, poor kid, and I'm looking at paying, I don't know what your tuition is here, but if you come to Oberlin, it's a couple $100,000 for 4 years or whatever. And I've got limited assets, limited resources. I could arguably do as well with a computer, modem, cheaply, get out online, and the only thing remaining is how do I get certified? And that's a solvable problem. And there are now other agencies coming in that will certify, University of Phoenix is one of the first in this game. But we're going to have to reinvent the product, and we're going to have to become better advocates for a liberal learning in places like this. As long as students can afford to come here, they'll come here. You've got sunshine, great universities, great brain power, terrific location, you've got everything going for you. But even here, you're going to have to rethink what a liberal education means as the world falls apart. What is our duty and responsibility to that world? What can we do to make it better? And that's not just a missionary zeal. Somebody said, are we at Oberlin a college or a cause? Well, my response to that was, you can't be a college without a cause. If you say we have no cause, well, your cause then is the defense of the status quo. You're comfortable. Keep it everything like it is. That's a cause. So you can't be without a cause. The history will measure us on whether our cause was the right cause that fit the time and the place and the circumstances. And that is very different on a planet where the carbon emissions are now 400 parts per million and rising to 450. Nobody in this room, again, can give a good reason why we'll stop short of 450. There's no good reason. If you know, without some kind of heroic intervention and leadership, why don't we provide that? And so for here, for example, let me be really presumptive, okay, and get myself thrown out of here. Why don't you solarize these 7 campuses? Why don't you? You've got sunshine here. Why don't you zero out your carbon budget? You've got a governor that supports it. You've got a state with a lot of sunshine, a lot of assets. You've got brain power right close by. And then make that a series of classes in engineering, utility design, architecture, finances. I mean, there's a liberal arts curriculum in taking the agenda to solarize these 7 campuses and come together. And to say the technology doesn't exist, it's wrong. We did an 11-acre solar array 3 years ago. Had we done it last summer, we could have done it at half the cost that we did 3 years ago. And even 3 years ago, it penciled out financially just fine to the Oberlin Board of Trustees. It was a good deal. It'd be a far better deal now. So what holds you back here? I don't know. I mean, it may be very good reasons. I don't know. And that is presumptive, and I apologize for being presumptive. I said the same thing on Friday night in Sanibel Island, Florida. And Sanibel is a little bit different. Sanibel is a beautiful island off the west coast of Florida. Probably the highest spot on Sanibel is 4 or 5 or 6 feet. It's going underwater. It lives under a contingent death sentence. And so in 1976, they adopted the Sanibel Plan, and the Sanibel Plan was one of the most far-reaching land use plans at the time. It preserved a good bit of the island, and now they have to rethink the Sanibel Plan. And so I put the same challenge to them. Why don't you solarize this and say something to the state of Florida? You may go underwater, you probably will in 50, 60, 70 years or some period of time. But make a statement, and lead. So anyway, Russell, thanks for the question. I'm sorry I wandered off into telling you all what you should do. That's the danger of bringing outside people in here. They can sometimes be presumptive. Is there one last question or so?
I think that's all the time we have for questions, but we welcome everyone to join us for the next panels of the day in Davidson Lecture Hall. We have our law panel, our business panel, and our nonprofits panel still to come. So please join me in thanking David Orr.
Oh, thank you.